So immigration is a fascinating area of sociology. It seems like it's um, uh, been, at least in the last few years, a political um, issue, but in fact, immigration around the world has always been an issue. Um, okay, so the major questions are: what is immigration? How has it changed over time? Why do people move? How do immigrants fare in their new environment? What are the consequences of immigration? Question one: what is immigration and how did it change over time? From a sociological perspective, immigration is a process. It's an ongoing process. It's been going on since human populations in small areas has grown. There's emigration and immigration. That is people moving to a place and entering a country, or people leaving a place, which is emigration. Receiving and sending countries. Who benefits? Um, so those are important things to consider. So during the Syrian refugee crisis, countries around the world were taking immigrants, Syrian immigrants. Some people were actively recruiting them. Germany was recruiting many immigrants from Syria because many of them were younger with good labor skills. So it really depends in many ways on the receiving and sending countries what they want. Immigration policy in the United States is in flux at the present time. There's legally permanent residents, um, which would include most of us, foreign born residents or naturalized citizens or derived citizens, and temporary legal residents. These are non-immigrants. And then authorized immigrants, or as the term goes, illegal immigrants. People who are seeking immigration get a visa, which is the circumstances of the foreign-born person and why they're there. 23 classes of non-immigrant visas exist, dominated by a variety of letters and numbers, including visas for tourists, students, and specialty workers. When we went to Uganda, we had to get work visas because we were doing non-government agency work in a church. Your status can include your refugee status or asylum status if you're a political or otherwise um, refugee. And then you can gain legal permanent residence. Immigration is a very complicated process in the United States. In fact, Chicago has many immigrant attorneys to represent people to sift through these issues. The number of legally permanent residents is numerically limited from each country. And some countries have numerically unlimited legal permanent residents. Immigrant behavior cannot be understood without understanding immigrants' legal status in the United States. So, for example, people may not drive, they may take public transportation, they may keep a low profile because of their status in the United States, which includes the legal permanent resident status, the green card, whether you're being sponsored. Becoming a citizen is a process called naturalization. The period of time that the legal and permanent residents, their physical presence in the United States, knowledge of English, knowledge of history and government in the United States, whether they're good moral character, and their attachment to the United States Constitution. Interestingly enough, you might turn this question on yourself. How would you do on the naturalization test? Knowledge of government and history, good moral character, and the only difference is that we were born here and they weren't. It can be from a parent. Children who are legally permanent residents, unmarried, under 18, and in parents' legal and physical custody automatically become citizens. They derive citizenship from their parents. So then you see cases where two people who are not legal residents have a child who becomes a legal resident and causes all kinds of legal and logistical nightmares. The first immigration era was in 1789 to 1874, called pre-restriction. There were no restrictions at the time. Second wave was 1875 to 1920, was qualitative restrictions. They've explained these in the textbook. The third wave was 1921 to 1964. There was worldwide qualitative restriction and quantitative on Eastern Hemisphere. That would be in Asia. In the fourth immigration era, from 65 to present, there's both qualitative and quantitative restrictions on both hemispheres. Question 2, why do people move? There's a self-selection process, push-pull factors, and migration dynamics. What factors influence the desire to move? There are many. Some are push factors. In home country drive people to leave. So, for example, when people left Syria or left Eastern Europe during World War II, that's a push factor. They include economic hardship, political strife, etc. And there are pull factors in receiving country, what attracts people to go there. And the same thing, economic and political characteristics. People like to come to the United States because it's a land of opportunity. Who could blame someone for not wanting to immigrate legally or otherwise to get out of a bad situation, especially if you have a family? There are some factors that impact the desire to move. They include the self-selection, people that just want to get out of someplace. There could be the potential for earnings. So you have a skill set that could make you more money in a certain place, so you decide to move. Health. Whether or not you have access to good health care could mean moving away to another country where they do. Or familial habits. That is, maybe this is more of a nomadic group of people that like to move around. Question 3, how do immigrants fare in their new environments? Well, not always good at times. The measures of assimilation include the fact that assimilation is multifaceted. It's not one-dimensional. They compare that and it affects whether a person remains in the new country that they're living in, how well they learn English, especially if they're living in the United States, whether or not they have an opportunity to become a U.S. citizen ever, and becoming more like the native people they live around. Not natives as in Native Americans, but the natives that live in the United States. So, for example, immigrants from Ireland during the 1860s was met with strife because there were native Irish and immigrant Irish. And you want to become as much like the people you live with as possible. Data from the New Immigrant Survey shows that fundamental ideas in studying immigrant assimilation. So they can measure some of those things and actually see if there are emerging trends. Defines the population whose assimilation is studied. I mentioned Irish just a minute ago, but they didn't have this back in the 1860s. It recognizes most immigrants are self-selected and thus motivated to assimilate. So if you really want to live in the States, you learn how to speak English. And identifying the roles of family reunification within the system. So some families split up so they can actually all get here, and then they reunify at some point. In fact, my grandparents, when they came from Eastern Europe before World War II, actually came separately and reunified in Detroit. Language and spatial concentrations are a big issue, which leads to the development of ethnic enclaves. Large numbers of persons of a single geographic area. So if you've ever been in San Francisco and you go to Chinatown, it is like being in China. People do not speak English. They are a pretty self-contained ethnic group. Their knowledge of English more likely on the high concentration areas of non-English speaking people. People who expect to spend less time in the United States are less likely to invest in learning English. Question 4. What are the consequences of immigration? The impacts include certain dilemmas for families, like making enough money to make ends meet, how to get the family all back together in one spot. The impacts of immigration also include the children of migration, foreign-born children living in with foreign-born parents in the United States. That is a whole separate problem. Native-born children living with foreign-born parents in the United States, like the Dreamers. And foreign-born children living in the origin country. Native-born children living with parental origin country. So depending on if the parent is foreign-born or living in the original country, and whether or not the child, where they were born at too. So you can get a typology of parent and child country of origin. There are second generation effects. How do second generation kids fare? They live in the destination country born to foreign-born parents. They do better than their parents, basically, because they learn English. They assimilate more quickly. They outperform third and higher generation children of similar potential, partly because they are more motivated to assimilate. And the varied outcomes by children of highly skilled immigrant parents. So all children don't do equally well. If your parents are highly skilled, it may in fact impair your performance. Unauthorized status, JASO did a research study and discovered that the probability of being fluent in English was higher among children whose parents had illegal experience than among children whose parents had had never been unauthorized. Again, take into consideration some of those factors, the motivation to assimilate. George W. Bush's Council on Economic Advisors, the white papers in 2007, showed that on average, U.S. citizens benefit from immigration. You wouldn't know that today, though. Careful studies of the long-run effects of immigration on government budgets concluded that it is likely to have a modest positive influence. We need to keep in mind, too, that most everyone that's listening to this, or for that matter in this country, were at some point immigrants to the United States. And we fare pretty well. Skilled immigrants are likely to be especially beneficial to natives, in addition to contributions to innovation they have a significant positive fiscal impact through making money for companies, through paying taxes to the government, to putting children in school and benefiting local school districts. I mean, the impact is very positive. Immigrants generally don't steal other people's jobs. They do jobs that many people would not do. Remittances. Migrant remittances constitutes an extremely important source of income for individuals. That's families and households around the world, and especially in developing countries. So what happens is an immigrant who makes money sends money home to their families. So it's like trickle down, or trickle out. And of course, there are transfers as well. Not only do people send money home, but some people actually get money from abroad. And that's the end.